Good evening, and thank you for coming. My name is Tanya Kelly. I'm the principal of Place Studio Landscape Design here in Newport, and I'll be your host this evening. I'd like to thank Kathy Staub and her staff here at the Jane Pickens for taking on this event on a Friday night. I would like to begin this evening with a few words from Mayor Harry Winthrop.
Thank you, Tanya. And thanks for clapping. I don't normally get that, but thank you very much. I want to thank you, Tanya, for inviting me here tonight, as well as Helen Papp and Lily Dick for putting on this particular event. When I was having a discussion with Lily last night, I said, you know, without the help of the people in the community, things like this just don't happen, because the government doesn't do all of these things that need to be done. So it's always great when the volunteer organization steps forward and make these things happen. So I really want to thank you very much for everything that you're doing. I'd also like to recognize Justin McLaughlin, who's in the audience with us tonight. Justin's a big supporter of the environment and open space, and Justin, thank you for being here. Now tonight's forum is going to be the first of many events that I think you're going to be seeing over the next year or maybe years to help with the development of a comprehensive plan for the use of our parks and our open spaces. It's really going to start a public dialogue on how to best develop a comprehensive plan to do space planning and management systems, which will include the entire community. You know, to a certain extent, there was a lot of criticism with the process that was used in Queen Anne Square. A lot of us thought that it was good, but when you really start talking to the people, they said, you know, there were different things in different areas where we would have liked to had input, and you know what, they're absolutely right. And this will be geared towards getting as much public input as possible. And that this will serve to protect and preserve the space that we have, and hopefully even create additional open space here in the city of Newport. Everybody says where? I said, well, I don't know, but you know, unless you go out and look at it, you're not going to know. So again, I want to thank the organizers for doing this. This is really a big step forward, and the people of the city of Newport, and especially the city staff and the city council, appreciates everything that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Winthrop. I'd like to present the next person who's going to just say a few words, Chuck Allett, the Executive Director of the Aquidneck Land Trust, who's been a tremendous help to our team and who's been driving back and forth to a conference in Providence at the same time, so we're happy you could make it. Chuck.
Thank you, Tanya. So I come here tonight from the National Land Trust Convention that's being held in Providence this week. Over 1,800 open space conservationists are meeting in Providence, and I'm happy to report that the conservation movement is alive and well, both here in Rhode Island and in the country in general. I think that convention comes to Rhode Island so often. It's come twice in 10 years, because not just because it's so beautiful here, but also because they realize what kind of relevancy open space has in this community. There are land trusts across the country that save thousands of acre parcels in one transaction. But what I find, and the people, we just led a field trip down here of people from all over the country, and what they really saw was that an 8-acre waterfront parcel in downtown Newport can have as much community impact as a 100,000-acre parcel in Colorado. So I think that our open space is extremely important to us, and we have always supported it. The Land Trust has protected just under 2,500 acres on Aquidneck Island, and we hope to be a partner in the future in protecting these very important open spaces in Newport. So thank you very much for coming. We are so happy to be a partner in this process.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chuck. Next we have Tina Dolan, who's the former Executive Director of the Aquidneck Island Planning Commission and the new Executive Director of the Newport Tree Society and Arboretum. And we're happy to have Tina here tonight on our behalf.
Well, thank you. I'm really delighted to be here, and I'm especially happy to be the new director of the Tree Society. And it's really, I'm really drawing on my roots for this job, since I have spent 12 to 15 years in conservation when I worked on Cape Cod before coming here in 2004. So it's a return for me, and it's a chance to really work in a field that I love. So we are working with so many of you, and I would like to say, I think many of you know, but just in case you don't, is that Newport is one of the few communities in the nation whose remarkable collection of trees and shrubs has been accredited as an arboretum by the Illinois-based Morton Register of Arboreta. And through the leadership of Lily Dick and the Tree Society Board of Directors, who has led this effort, we've achieved the 2nd out of 4 accreditation levels as an arboretum. And along with this distinction has come 2 spectacular grants, each $100,000 from the Alida Morris McBean Foundation and also the Van Buren Charitable Foundation. And through these grants, we are going to work. The kickoff tonight is starting the conversation on open space, and we are going to focus on a 2-year process of developing a comprehensive parks and open space plan with the city of Newport through a wide-ranging collaborative effort. And you will be involved. It focuses to a great deal on the engagement of civic and also of neighborhood organizations, agencies, municipalities and schools, representatives of neighborhoods, in order to really for everyone to be a part of the process, because the benefits that we gain from the parks and open space and the tree collections, the canopy in Newport, are very wide-ranging, and they should have the input from as many different sectors as possible. So we would like to bring these sectors into developing the best and the brightest as we incorporate a final state-of-the-art design to protect and preserve Newport's spectacular heritage of trees, parks, and open spaces. So we hope you enjoyed tonight's program, and we will be seeing you again. We hope you will join us this year and on into next year as we go through this process, and we really appreciate your coming out on a Friday night. It's terrific to see the energy and the enthusiasm as we start this process. So thank you.
Thanks, Tina. So thank you, Tina, Chuck, and Mayor Winthrop. I would also like to thank the City of Newport, the Tree and Open Space Commission, the Aquidneck Land Trust, the Aquidneck Island Planning Commission, and the Newport Tree Society and Arboretum for this opportunity. I would also like to thank Paul Carroll, Scott Wheeler, and Melissa Barker of the City of Newport, Rocky Steves of the Tree and Open Space Commission, and Tina Dolan and Helen Papp, my partner in crime this evening, of the Newport Tree Society and Arboretum for their help in this event. I'd also like to thank our student volunteers who are here tonight from the University of Rhode Island's Landscape Architecture School. These students represent the URI chapter of the American Society of Landscape Architects. Please give them a round of applause. I would especially like to thank Elizabeth Lynn of the Van Buren Charitable Foundation, who are the sponsors for this event. This evening's lecture, the experience, oh, you can clap, absolutely, absolutely. This evening's lecture, the experience of open space, as has been mentioned, is the beginning of a year-long effort to discuss Newport's unique and varied open spaces. Our goal is to engage you, the public, in a discussion of open space in order to define the needs of the community and gain consensus for a parks and open space plan for the city. In addition, we hope to assist the City of Newport with its open space section of the Comprehensive Land Use Plan, which will be under revision beginning in October. Cross your fingers. Over the next year, we will have a series of special lectures and workshops and events which will reflect topics concerning Newport's unique open spaces. So open space is a broad topic, right? It includes history, culture, recreation, landscape design, nature, habitat, sea level rise, energy and environment, economics, sustainable management practices, policy, views, historic streetscapes, and more. So tonight we'll explore 4 open space topics: urban horticulture, cultural landscapes, sea level rise, and the economics of public space. That's only 4 of a lot of other topics. According to the 2012 census, Newport is 98% urban and 2% rural. Our proximity to the water and large estates and parks on the south end of the island give one the impression that we have a lot of open space, but we need to begin to define what open space looks like in an urban setting. We're asking you here tonight to turn your thoughts to open space, and I know you'll be inspired by tonight's speakers. So, due to time constraints on this venue, we'll need to end and leave the building by 8:40, 8:45. So we're not going to have a question and answer period after this lecture, but as an alternative, we provided everyone with a questionnaire, which we would like you to fill out and leave with the volunteers, the student volunteers, on your way out. So you have clipboards with little lights, and so we're trying this out, and we hope you have some good questions. If you do not have a questionnaire, you'd like one right now, please raise your hand and someone will get you a questionnaire. Okay. We hope to post as many of these questions on our website as we can, so you, the public, and our speakers here tonight can begin an online dialogue about open space. So please go to our website, newportopenspace.org. And for those of you who would like to ask questions of the speakers in person, we will be adjourning to the Colony House at the head of Washington Square for a reception immediately following the lecture. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, my dear friend and mentor, Ron Henderson. Ron is an architect, landscape architect, and the founding principal of L+A Architecture here in Newport. L+A has received awards for landscape planning, urban design, landscape architecture design, ecological planning, historic preservation, and sustainability from international, national, and local organizations. Ron is professor of landscape architecture and Asian studies at the Pennsylvania State University, where he also holds the Stuckman Chair in Design Integration. He previously was Associate Professor of Landscape Architecture and Deputy Director of the International Master in Architecture degree program at Tsinghua University in Beijing, China. He was the first international faculty to be appointed to a permanent position at Tsinghua School of Architecture, the oldest school of architecture in China. He has held previous appointments at the Rhode Island School of Design and Roger Williams University. Ron is widely recognized for both design and education accomplishments and has been invited to lecture at many universities, conferences, and agencies worldwide. He is a fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects, one of the highest levels of recognition in the profession. He was the 2012 National Endowment for the Arts Creative Artist Fellow in Japan. His book, The Gardens of Suzhou, was published in 2012 by University of Pennsylvania Press and is funded by a grant from the J. Paul Getty Trust. I'm very pleased to present to you Ron Henderson.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tanya. Let's see. Great. We're off and running. Yes. Turn on. Okay. It's really great to be here tonight to kick off what's going to be clearly a very important period in Newport's consideration of open space over the next several years. And as Tanya mentioned, there are many, many, many different aspects of open space, and this is kind of a funny one, which is partly the relationship between trees and public space. And we're going to start in Japan. As Tanya mentioned, I spent time in an NEA grant in Japan looking at the relationship between culture and trees. It was great to meet Tina tonight and understand the importance of really the city as an arboreta. So this will probably provide some cultural overlays as well as horticulture and routine kind of maintenance overlays onto the tree collection of Newport, would probably be a way that you could look through what it is that I'm going to show tonight. The scene of a cherry blossom viewing party where people drink sake with friends on a red carpet under trees and paper lanterns or inside open tents represents the fundamental character of Japanese architecture. First of all, people come together. I would say that's a fundamental aspiration of open space. People come together to see the cherry blossoms in full bloom, and primitive architecture, the carpet and the tent, is built for the event. It's not that the architecture is there at the beginning. On the contrary, it's the human act of getting together that exists first. It's only afterwards that architecture comes into being to envelop the action. The party reaches its peak when at sunset dusk deepens and the scene is veiled in increasing darkness. Some start singing while others dance to the music. As the night wears on, the people, getting tired of pleasure, take down the tents and go home. It sounds like a Newport event, leaving the cherry blossoms floating in the dark like clouds. The end of the event means the simultaneous end of the architecture as well. This is an essay from the Japanese architect Toyo Ito. The collection of individual specimens or of groups of trees, in this case the cherry trees, do structure many cities in Japan. This is a city, Kawazu, with about a 4-kilometer long alley of cherry trees. This is a town of 8,000 people that's visited by 300,000 people in a 3-week period every spring. Vehicles are also enveloped in the action, as well as in this diagram, trains with cherry trees planted overhead. The wind from the train rustles the cherry blossoms, and you kind of go through this cherry blossom petal storm as you ride down the tracks. In investigating the cherry blossoms, I looked at many individual parks throughout the city, throughout the country, to investigate how they are used. So this is Ritsuren Koen in Shikoku Island. There's a line of cherry trees, a grove of cherry trees, a line of cherry trees, and one cherry tree. This is an individual specimen cherry tree with a structure that lifts this weeping cherry tree off the ground so you can get under it. This is a particularly compelling place. If you speak about how you might design the perfect place for a perfect tree to specimen, here's a line of cherry trees elevated along this bank. There's a path that comes along here and a small stream that comes through here. In the spring, the cherry blossoms fall. They collect on the bank so you can see them elevated at eye level. They filter down here, and they also filter and fall down into the stream, which then carries them into a tea house. That's that. The park also has a bridge with a cherry tree and a pine tree marking its side. But most interesting in Japan is the beginning of the cherry blossom season, in which a committee gathers around the official cherry tree of each city in order to determine when the first blossom has happened. It takes 5 petals to make it official first blossom. The TV crews all come. Everyone's sitting there going, I see one up there. No, that one's not open enough. And everyone celebrates Kaika, the beginning of the cherry blossom season in their city. This idea that trees and the performance of landscapes can become cultural markers, annual events, I think is a really important kind of message that I would like to get across this evening. Kenroku-en Park in Kanazawa, that event happens in the winter. This is on the west coast of Japan where the snow is quite extensive. The trees are supported by crutches and braces, but most spectacularly by these yukitsuri, which are posts with a series of ropes that go down and collect and tie off the ends of branches so that they don't break in the winter. As you can see, it's a very heavy snowfall. And these are simply horticultural devices. These are cultural traditions of how to maintain the health of trees. Simply tied off branches. This is November, early November, when they're raising the posts. Kind of what to do with this in our own practice. We're trying to think of ways in which we can begin to amplify the presence of trees in our projects. Architects probably know that their buildings never look better than the day that their building opens. For landscape architects, our projects never look worse than the day they open. But perhaps if we can have these kinds of maintenance techniques, it can amplify them some more. These are 400 to 500-year-old trees in Beijing that have been transplanted. They've been saved from the modernization of Beijing and then wrapped in these structures, which are amazing, Christo-like presence in the urban public space, and some sketchbooks from my time in China looking at some of those winter protection conditions. Our work at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, which the new edition opened 2 years ago, one of the places we were looking at is this series of little courtyards, these right here, and we were able to take a kind of nursery mechanism of staking and guying, tied with some of the things that I learned in Japan and China, stick them in this really tough space, and we're able to put a series of 54 almost parvifolia Chinese lacebark elms into that space. And the staking and guying with bamboo and twine begins to amplify the presence of those trees as juveniles. A quick thing on memorial trees. We'll come away from Japan for just a moment. This is Roger Williams Park in Providence, and there's a very obscure, amazing landscape there, the Union Veterans of Civil War grove, which is a grove of sugar maple trees planted in the shape of a star that overlooks the lake. This is it in the early 20th century. These are them now. You can see these planted in a row very, very, very closely. I think this speaks about the collective form of trees in the city and their ability to carry cultural memory. We've been working with the folks in the Providence Parks Department on restoration strategies, soil remediation, and reforestation. At the World Trade Center Memorial, the one memorial tree is here. You can see this is actually the edge of the memorial, so you can see how close this tree was to the towers that survived. And is now one of the, in the times that I've been at the memorial, the area where probably more people are gathered listening to a ranger describe stories. This tree has become quite a powerful testament. And last, Ususumi Zakura. It's a 1,400-year-old Higan cherry. It's also a memorial tree. It's 1,400 years old, but it's also known the day that it was planted and by whom. It was planted by person who had been named the Emperor of Japan, and he had hidden in this town in which his first child had been born. And after he was named emperor, he had to leave the village, and he planted this tree when he left the village. Again, almost 300,000 people come to visit this tree every year when it's in bloom. I think it's just an incredible testament to the power of trees to shape our cultural lives and to bring joy and beauty and cultural continuity. This is a sketchbook for me of taking this little train out to the tree here. You take this little train, it's like a Miyazaki film. There's one train car painted pink. And you go through this cherry blossom landscape. There are cherries lining the canals. There are mountain cherries. There are cherries down along the streams. Around each of the train stations, there are groves of cherry trees. And you end up at this 1,400-year-old tree. Which then has a series of yukitsuri, which are the posts with the ropes, braces, and then crutches supporting its ancient branches. And that's pretty much the note that I will leave us on, is this little train ride out through the countryside, passing by this one landscape of trees. The festival was supposed to be on the 15th. Maybe this is a little bit of, we'll hear of climate change and other matters. The cherry trees are one of the indicators of the seasons. And then here at this 1,400-year-old cherry tree. Newport has a lot of old and majestic and noble trees. I think it's would be great to consider how those can endure in the culture of Newport with more resonance than they could endure in almost any other city. I think that would be a great aspiration for open space consideration in Newport as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Well, our next speaker, Matthew Traucht, comes to us from the Cultural Landscape Foundation in Washington, D.C. The Cultural Landscape Foundation is a nonprofit organization that provides people with the ability to see, understand, and value landscape architecture and its practitioners in the way many people have learned to do with buildings and their designers. Through its website, lectures, outreach, and publishing, TCLF broadens the support and understanding for cultural landscapes nationwide to help safeguard our priceless heritage for future generations. Matthew manages the Cultural Landscape Foundation's What's Out There program. The goal of this searchable, easy-to-navigate database is to raise public awareness of the rich diversity and interconnectedness of our shared designed landscape heritage. Spanning over 2 centuries of American landscape design, the What's Out There database is a searchable by landscape name, locale, designer, type, and style. So that's really huge for landscape, for the profession. Matthew received his undergraduate degree in cultural anthropology from the University of New Mexico and his master's degree in landscape architecture from the University of Minnesota. He's worked for nonprofit organizations documenting wilderness in the Southwest. He's worked as an archaeologist on prehistoric sites and owned an organic farm near Santa Fe. He joined the Peace Corps and moved to the Gambia, West Africa, and he studied landscape architecture in the Netherlands and Italy and interned with UNESCO, where he documented cultural sites in Kiribati. Please give a warm Newport welcome to Matthew Traucht, who's never been here before.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for that nice welcome. It's a beautiful place. I'm really glad to be here. I wish that my sketchbooks looked a little bit like Ron's. That was just amazing. Those drawings are incredible. So I wanted to start out a little bit just talking about what the Cultural Landscape Foundation does and how you can access our material. And then we'll talk a little bit about Newport through the lens of cultural landscapes, management, documentation, and so forth. So, so first of all, the Cultural Landscape Foundation looks at historic, vernacular, and ethnographic landscapes as well as designed places all across the nation. And we look at cultural landscapes as the way that we experience place, the way that these places matter to us as national heritage as well as local heritage. So you know that very well when you see people coming here to visit the Gilded Age cottages or the Cliff Walk, or to experience Newport and everything that it has. So these are cultural landscapes all over the world, are very significant. And the cultural landscape, I guess we don't need to go through this since Tanya already covered it, but it's sort of some of the different things that we do as a nonprofit organization. We develop these educational tools and we raise awareness and visibility of the work of landscape architects and also the ephemerality of landscapes. The fact that they evolve and change and that they need stewardship. And this is a big part of what we do at the cultural landscape. Okay, let me, like Bob Barker or something. You remember how he had? So yeah, I won't. Okay, so this is, yeah, these are cultural landscapes. Okay, so I don't want to spend too much time with that sort of thing. But these are some of our programs that we work on. As Tanya mentioned, we have the What's Out There program, which is the one that I'm most focused on, but all of our programs are completely interrelated. And as we look at one type of design, we start to learn more about designers, and we learn about open space, and we learn about designed landscapes, and then they affect the other programs that we have through our organization. So has anybody seen our website? I just kind of get an idea. A couple people have looked at it. Okay, this is what it looks like. Basically, you can see that we have the ability to navigate within the website to find different types of the material that we have, the different content that we have. And you can look for the What's Out There program on our website, and you can search for more than 1,500 different landscapes that are in our database. And you can search for them by looking at designers' names or types and styles or location. You can find them on a map. There are all different kinds of ways to learn more about landscapes. We also post a lot on social media, Facebook and Twitter. And so our content always directs back to our website, and our website directs to the sites and properties that we have advocated for and that we have documented. So it becomes this feedback loop where people are experiencing a little bit about landscape through our documentation, but then it takes the user then to those different places so that we can learn more about them. So this is the What's Out There page, for instance. And you can see that you can search for different things by different types or different styles of landscape. As I mentioned, you can find them on maps. And we've actually added more landscapes to the Newport area just in the last couple of weeks. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And then you can also find the different designers that we have advocated for, that we've documented. And you can find different biographies about these people and learn about their styles. And then we also have a program called What's Nearby, which if any of you have smartphones in the room, you can click on What's Nearby, and it uses GIS information, and it brings you to that. It brings you to all the different landscapes that are nearby within a 25-mile radius. So it helps you find places to visit when you're going to other places, or even when you're experiencing your own city. You can learn more about them. So another way to learn about the weekend through the What's Out There program and to learn about landscapes is to look at the What's Out There weekend program that we do. And we've done a number of these different weekends where we offer free tours of cultural landscapes, significant landscapes all over the country. And this year we're doing Miami and Richmond, and we're going to be in Los Angeles in November. And then in 2015, we're going to be actually here in Newport. So we're working with a number of different local partners, and we hope to increase that visibility and have a lot more partners on the program. So we'll be here in May, and we hope to be able to experience a lot of what Newport County has to offer. So we're already starting to look at some of these sites that we want to document. That means that we get photographs of these places, that we study the landscape designs, we start to learn more about the designers, about the histories of all those places, and then we put that information out there for other people to find. And so it becomes a tool that students can use, that designers can use, that preservationists can use, that tourists use. Through the What's Out There weekend, we see maybe 1,200 to 1,500 different attendees coming to different tours. The tours are all free, and they're led by experts. And so it's a way that people get a chance to start to learn more about their own cities, as well as people who travel to these weekends. So you can see that we're actually looking at a number of places here in Newport City as well. So how do we see landscapes? Well, here's a local example that I think we're going to see a little bit more of tonight, is this idea of thinking about history and modernity together, and we look at the way that things have changed and the way that things haven't changed. I really think this is a wonderful local project that I'm excited to learn a little bit more about. We also get to learn about landscapes by visiting them and reading interpretive material and getting to understand what is in our midst. And through that visibility, it helps us understand more about the way that things are connected, either through designers or through trends, through styles and types. And we can start to look at some of the different open spaces. This is one of the maps that was provided to me as I was starting to learn a little bit more about Newport. And the American Society of Landscape Architects also talks a lot about the ecosystem services that are provided by open space. And so we understand these view corridors and scenic easements, and we think about creating this network of interconnected spaces within open space. And so it's a multifunction strategy of looking at design that as we learn a little bit more about the Gilded Age Newport, this is for the World Heritage Site application, we also start to study a little bit about the cultural identity of places. And I think in Newport we have that through a number of different lenses. The Gilded Age is definitely one of those, but Newport was a laboratory for landscape architects working on a number of different projects, including a lot of public projects that aren't included in just that Gilded Age vision of what Newport is. We start to see a little bit about cultural landscapes through National Historic Landmark. Within Newport County, we have 23 listings of these National Historic Landmarks, but only 4 of those are significant for landscape architecture. The rest are significant for things like designers of architects, or significant as architecture. And so we would like to see that visibility of what landscape architecture is as a setting for these places, as an envelope, as Ron mentioned, as a way to really think a little bit more about the preservation of open space, because landscape architecture is always concerned with open space, concerned with the surroundings. And so we also see that there are National Register of Historic Places, 122 listings, but only 10 of those are significant in landscape architecture, and we see those here. So we start to think a little bit about how the National Park Service and Secretary of Interior understands cultural landscapes, and we have this idea of conveying its significance in history. They also possess historic integrity, and I think that in Newport we have a lot of that, and some of that is returning through site-sensitive design that we're starting to see. Some of the places, though, that the Cultural Landscape Foundation is looking at, we see that the landscape is not designated, unfortunately, and as landscapes aren't designated, the visibility isn't there. And so we can see some of these places, like St. George School, where the Olmsted firm did 10 drawings, or we can look at a place like Beacon Hill House with over 160 drawings. And so we all are aware, I hope, of the significance of someone like Frederick Olmsted, but also all the other landscape architects who've worked in this area. We start to see that there are all these different trends that are going on, but unfortunately the landscape itself is not valued, or it's not protected through these National Register listings. So the Cultural Landscape Foundation encourages people to think more about the cultural landscapes in our midst, to think about raising that visibility a little bit and making sure that people understand the importance of those places as not just a setting for the houses or for the structures that are there, but also as significant in site design, as significant in community development, and significant, having significance in the economics or the history of a place. So we're starting to look at a lot of these different things, and these are some of the places that we hope to document through our What's Out There program. When I considered Rosecliff, I started to do a little research about the idea about Versailles, and that's what the structure was modeled after, and that's how it's pitched in the National Register. But also think about the landscape too, also very similar between the two. There are those trends that are continuing. And then we also have Horace Trumbauer and Paul Astor and different people who are working in Newport besides the Olmsteds, Christopher Tunnard in this private garden here. And then we have the Cliff Walk, obviously a very important place. Unfortunately, it's not designated a National Register of Historic Places. It is important that it's a National Recreation Trail, but we'd like to see the visibility of this place raised even further. When we start to think about what the Cliff Walk did, we can see that even though it has this historic component as being a vernacular landscape or ethnographic landscape for fishermen, it was also important as the Gilded Age started to change the face of Newport. It still was a democratic place that all of us could access. It maintained that public edge to even those private spaces. It advances really, really quickly. Somehow. Okay. So here we are. But then we also learn a little bit about the sensitivity of that place, and we start to learn about how climate change and how, even though these places are resilient, they're also very sensitive to their surroundings. And so we want to look at different ways that are sensitive to preserving these places. And I had no idea really what I was getting into when I started to study a little bit about Maya Lin and how much of her legacy is here, right? But I think that it is important that now that the design is there, I think it's starting to become more and more loved. It's starting to be something that people understand a little bit. And we start to think about that as site sensitive, and we think about it as scenery and connections and the picturesque view that Olmsted thought was so important while he was here. We think about the intricately detailed designs that are all around Newport, and this idea that nature is towering over mankind. This was Olmsted's writing in 1913, and I think when we start to look around the city of Newport and we think about open space and we think about public access to those open spaces, many of those are still with us today. The same places that he valued then are still alive and well for us to enjoy. And I think it's important to have a strong documentation of those places and to raise the visibility of those so that as the city matures and as we move into the next era, whatever that may be, we can think a little bit more about the legacy of landscape here, and that's what we hope to accomplish with our partnerships here, and hopefully with our participation in the Open Space Forum. So with that, I think it's on 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. That was great. Our next speaker is Grover Fugate, who's the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Coastal Resource Management Council, or CRMC. In his role of nearly 28 years, he's been responsible for overseeing the development of all policies and programs for the state's coastal program. He currently is the project manager of the Council's new Shoreline Change Special Area Management Plan, or SAMP, which is a forward-looking plan at how climate change is impacting Rhode Island's shoreline and developing appropriate responses to this threat and protecting the state's coastal infrastructure. Due to his leadership with the Ocean SAMP project and other coastal planning efforts, Grover has earned several significant awards, including the prestigious 2010 Susan Snow Cotter Award for Excellence in Ocean and Coastal Resource Management from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. He is also the recipient of the 2010 Regional Sea Grant Outstanding Outreach Award, the 2008 Coastal America Award for Habitat Restoration, and the 2008 Rhode Island Sea Grant Lifetime Achievement Award. In addition to his duties as executive director, he also serves as the state co-lead to the Ocean Planning Initiative for the Northeast Regional Ocean Council, and is also the state co-lead for the regional planning body established under President Obama's executive order on the National Ocean Policy. Grover is the author of academic journal articles on coastal and natural resources management issues and is adjunct faculty at the URI in the Marine Affairs program. He's also a guest lecturer at Roger Williams University Law School on coastal and marine law, and we are very honored to have with us tonight Grover Fugate.
Thank you and good evening. Now that we've had those uplifting portions of the presentation for the agenda, I'm the Debbie Downer portion of tonight. So what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of a setting here for climate change and what we perceive as a threat to all of us in this country, but more importantly for the coastal areas, and specifically for Rhode Island and particularly Newport. So I'm going to go through some of this information. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a setting of climate change and what's going on so that you start to understand that, so it performs, or it gives us a little bit of context, at least for the latter part of the presentation. So what we're seeing is that sea level rise is certainly one of the more important aspects, particularly for coastal areas, obviously, in the United States. And there is a very high confidence interval that we're seeing sea level rise and accelerated sea level rise right now. And that estimates vary, and this is part of the problem that we deal with, is the high level of uncertainty that we're dealing with, because quite frankly, we really don't understand the system yet and how it's responding to this. The models that we run give us a result, but the real world results at the end of that are usually much worse than what we're seeing through the model. So we have a lot of catch up to do. And the coast does not flood like a bathtub. The change is going to be a lot more exciting, and we can see some of that here in a little bit. And that effective adaptation will require changing our entire approach, the way we look at coastal management, particularly in the United States. So if we look at sea level rise, and this is sort of a logarithmic compression, so it's a very interesting way of looking at this. But if you look at this latter part here, ever since about 1940, we've had a period of relatively calm, but then it started to take off. And these are the projections right now of what we're going to see for sea level rise as we start to go forward. If we look at, again, sea level rise rates since the last glaciation, as you can see, there have been these what they call ice pulses that have occurred, where we have major collapses within the ice sheets of Greenland and West Antarctic and Antarctic that produce these, but we've been in this period of relatively low and calm sea level rise for quite a period of time right now, ever since about, say, 5,000 years ago. So this is the point in time when we've adapted as a species to our environment, and we've adapted to these deltas, rivers, and other areas that have been relatively stable in terms of sea level rise during this period. And now all that's about to change now. So if we look at, again, the historic past, as you can see, this is sea level rise, say, over the last couple of thousand years. And as you can see, it's been relatively stable. We had a little bit of an uptick here. But now, as you can see, we're seeing a lot of noise here, and we're about to take off on this ride here as we start to go forward. So where does sea level rise come from? Well, there's a number of inputs, and this is part of the problem that we're having. And there's actually one on here that isn't shown that I'll explain a little bit later. But obviously, we have land and water changes that change the storage capacity that contributes to it. Land can rise and sink. So here, we're actually experiencing a little bit of what's called isostatic rebound. That is, when the glacier melted, the land started to lift, and now it's sinking a little bit. So we've got a little bit of sinking that's going on. The mid-Atlantic and certainly the Gulf have a lot more than we do. And then you've got the West Coast, where they've got tectonic plates and upthrust. So it really depends on where you're at as to this component of it. Then we have ocean currents are changing, and here in the area, say from Cape Hatteras to Boston, we can expect an additional 2 feet of sea level rise on the top of the global estimates because of the slowing of the Gulf Stream. So if we think of the Gulf Stream as a river, carrying water. As that river starts to slow down, that water will spread out, and we're going to be the lucky recipients of that. And then we have ice melt that goes into the ocean, and of course, the physical properties of water are when it warms, it expands. So this is what's called eustatic sea level rise as we start to deal with this. So the one that's not on here is the fact that the glaciers themselves, these two massive ice sheets that we have of West Antarctic or the Arctic ice sheet and Greenland, they are large masses, obviously, of ice that exert their own gravitational pull. So as they start to lose mass through wasting or melting, they start to lose their ability to hold that water adjacent to the glacier, and they will start to release that water, and I'll explain that here in a second. This is actually that whole issue. So as you can see, the ice mass, as it's very large and competent here, will retain water against it. As it starts to lose that mass and lose the gravitational pull, it will release water. So the irony of it is, around Arctic and Greenland, we can see sea level rise actually drop. And this is sort of an estimation of where that sea level rise will start to increase. And as you can see, it's not universal throughout the globe. Again, we are going to be the lucky recipients of most of that from the West Antarctic shelf. As it starts to melt, we will get most of that up here. So what happens when all this occurs? Obviously, we have erosion, we have overwash through storms, we can have barrier islands breaching, and when they are attacked in consecutive forms, we can get what's called threshold collapsing. That means that the barrier can no longer sustain itself and will collapse and will no longer be there. We're getting inundation, wetland loss, water quality reduction, and so all that's resulting in ecosystem change, and as we see with coastal storms, we're getting infrastructure failure. So let's bring it local. Let's come into Rhode Island and look at this. So this is Browning Cottage. This is down in South Kingstown. It was a very elegant and historic district at one time with these 5 cottages. By 1992, they had already started to suffer a lot of damage. 1999, obviously there's a major scarp there, and they are really threatened at this point. And then 2007, after the Patriots Day storm, you can see they're on the edge. This is the day after Sandy, so. And that's the day after the hurricane event, or in Rhode Island was actually a tropical storm. If we look at the town beach in South Kingstown, I want you to pay attention to this structure right here. So you can see there was a boardwalk here, another boardwalk structure here, came out to a little walkway down onto the beach, in a fairly wide beach at this point. Again, look at the date, August 1994. That's the day after Sandy. So all this is lost, and the erosion is up to here. We're also seeing an astounding loss of salt marsh in Rhode Island. And in fact, when our researchers go out in the field and look, it is incomprehensible that it could be occurring this fast, this much. But our salt marshes are literally drowning, and as you can see, these two are the identical sites. This one's 2004, this is 2010. We went from a healthy salt marsh to open water during that short period of time. So what does our future look like, given the changes that we're already seeing? So if we go back to that South Kingstown area and we look at the pavilion here, this is the expected erosion that will occur by 2100. So this is where this beach face here is going to be back here. This is the shoreline of 1951. This is 2012, and this will be the projected shoreline here. This is also with 5 feet of sea level rise, so these areas are going to be permanently inundated with sea level. If we look at a 1938 event with that sea level rise, this is what the landscape starts to look like. So these cottages here will be somewhere up here because they will be taken out. None of them are designed to withstand any of that event. And if you look down here, here's the scale. So this is the depth of water over the feature. So this is 10 feet of water that's coming over this feature here. And it's gonna, as I said, the surge is gonna penetrate all the way up to here. Again, 10 feet of water in this area, so this whole village will essentially be taken out at that point. So, from a coastal program, again, this is Charleston Beach, this is the day after Sandy, and so when we look at permitting, just to give you an idea how tight things are right now, that's the coastal feature that we use for permitting, so you can't be any further seaward than that feature. And then what we look at is typically a 50-foot separation, a minimum, from that feature, because this is the active beach here. That's the back line of the property line, and right now there's less than 50 feet. So it means the next storm event that comes through, if any of these structures get damaged, it's unlikely that they will be able to rebuild because they will not be able to meet the separation distances to build safely in these areas. Also, another issue that we're dealing with sea level rise is as we start to see structures that were designed to withstand these events. So in theory, this structure was designed to withstand a 100-year storm event. This is the surge envelope that comes in and then dissipates over the feature. When we get sea level rise, what happens is the surge goes like that. So what was designed to withstand an event today will not withstand future events because of the encroaching sea level. If we look at Newport and impose a 3-foot sea level rise, which right now NOAA's telling us that the mid-range estimates are by 2050, that's what happens to some of the features within Newport. And this is a projected 5-foot of sea level rise right here, and you can see what happens to the entire waterfront district. I've touched the button. As you can see, this is an area all the way up to Thames Street. It's essentially submerged at this point.
Testing.
Thanks. I'm going to have to do the teacup handle here. So you can see this waterfront district is projected to submerge by 2100. This is 5 feet of sea level rise. And as I indicated, NOAA's telling us internally that we should be looking at 3 feet of sea level rise by 2050. To get a closer look at what that looks like, what we've done is taken and blown up some of these so you can start to see what 5 foot of sea level rise will permanently inundate. This isn't a surge, this is day in and day out inundation. And this is the lower end of the harbor. That's what a 1938 event looks like with storm surge and sea level rise. So as you can see, again, this area here and here, we're looking at 10 feet of water. This is also very interesting because this is the surge event just blows right through this area and fills the harbor. And again, we're looking at about 10 feet of water rushing through this area here. So that's the 38 event, again in the upper harbor, lower harbor. And on top of it all, we get winds. And winds are very important for Rhode Island because the entire state is in the wind envelope for a hurricane. These are scenes from 1938, so it's important for the Tree Society to be aware of these because we have to be prepared for these types of events and what they might do to some of our more precious assets, some of these very large trees. 1938 is estimated, and the numbers are obviously not very accurate, but the estimate is between 1 billion to 2 billion trees were taken down in 1938, all the way up through New Hampshire. There was major wind throw. We have more tree growth right now than we do in 1938 because that was mostly farmland back then. So it's a very important consideration for us to think about as we go forward. So what are we doing about that? Now that I've got your attention and you're about ready to go out and commit suicide on me, what are we doing about it? Okay, well, what we're doing is we're looking at this and we're trying to take a very sobering light and see what the actual threat might be. And we're trying to also go all the way up to the worst case scenario, because when you're building sewage treatment plants and bridges which have a design life of 100 years, you want to make sure they're going to be around because we don't want to replace those things 2 and 3 times over. So what we're trying to do is get a better handle on what they might see in terms of events. We're also then taking that and then going back and trying to use expertise at the university and our own expertise and bringing outside design experts in to say, okay, how do we deal with this? How do we go back and make this area resilient to these events so that we can come back the day after a storm, people can go back in their homes, and Rhode Island keeps on ticking. We want to harden Rhode Island so that it can withstand these events and move on from that. So that's part of this, is to start to look at that, and then also obviously educate the public with presentations like this and others as we start to go forward. This is going to be a 4-year process. This is not something that we're in and out on. And we're hoping that it will be a sustaining effort with the communities that we can institute at the university level, so that it will be a continuing sustaining event through the university that will help the municipalities through this. We're not going to dig ourselves out of this immediately. We're going to have to dig ourselves out for quite a period of time. And then we're hoping to develop planning and development tools all the way down to the individual level. A lot of what we see in terms of resiliency planning and all the rest of it has been very large scale so far, looking at New York and other major areas. And while the development and the infrastructure in those areas warrants that type of look, most of the shoreline in Rhode Island, obviously, and most of the shoreline in the United States does not have that level of infrastructure development that's going to warrant federal dollars going into that type of events or looking at these shorelines after these events. So most of the U.S. shoreline is going to be on its own. And when we look at the way property ownership and the way that land use decisions are made, they're made at the local level and they're made on the individual level. So if we don't bring resiliency down and adaptation down to that level, we're fooling ourselves if we don't think that we will be successful in this. So we need to bring it right down to that level to make this meaningful. And we're starting to do some of that. One of the things we're working on is the Army Corps, after Hurricane Sandy, spent about $20 million on a modeling effort. It's probably the largest single modeling effort in this arena that's ever been taken. And as you can see, these are the focus areas for that modeling, and we are definitely in part of that, but it goes all the way up to New Hampshire. As part of that modeling, what they've done is they've taken some of the most advanced models that they have right now, AdCirc, and some of these others, and started to integrate these models because they did not talk very well to each other, and that's part of where the money was spent. And then what they started to do is, you can see they've developed a very high-resolution grid that went in all the way to the shoreline. The problem that we have is that these are supercomputer efforts, and the grid drops off our shore and really doesn't come in. So while they've done a fabulous effort at the federal level for federal agencies, the rest of us are sort of on our own. So what we're doing is we're taking that information and we're developing what's called storm tools. So we're taking the modeling that's been done, we're taking the save points that they've generated. Save points are essentially, what they do is they run a series of synthetic storms, that is hypothetical hurricanes, from wind directions, different wind directions, different high tide events, those types of things. And they run the model and they get an output, and then they save that. And they run that again and again and again. So there's about 1,000 synthetic storms that are in that save point. And then there are about 100 extratropical. So extratropical storms are like nor'easters, those types of events for us. So they combine both tropical and extratropical, and they save all that data in these save points. And in Rhode Island, we were able to put pressure on the Corps to make sure that the density of save points is very high here. So now what we're doing is we're taking that, and we've been able to look at supercomputer time, and believe it or not, there's a spot market for supercomputer time. And by using some of these developments, we can bring the cost of that computing down by a factor of 4 and make it affordable now for a state or municipality to grab a hold and use, and that's what we're doing. So we're using that to predict wind, waves, and currents, and we will be able to run these scenarios. What we're ultimately hoping to do to give to the communities for planning purposes and state agencies is we're going to give them these maps that will be in 25, 50-year, and 100-year storm intervals. These are important because these are design points that engineers typically look at. So if somebody was building a new marina, typically that infrastructure there is for about 20 years. So they would focus in on the 25-year storms to see what they could expect and design to that particular storm event. And then we'll do that over a series of sea level rise scenarios, all the way up to 5 feet. And it will be done for each town. There will be They can use 2 reference points. They can use the typical one that engineers use, or mean high water. And this map format will also show the depth of water over the feature in a very simplistic storm that we're looking at. And it will be available on RIGES, and each of the municipalities will have a set of those maps. And as you can see, we're targeting November of this year to get that done. So what that will do is show us a very good picture of where this back line of the surge event is. It won't give us a very detailed picture here. It will again give us a very simplified water elevation over the landscape, but we're going to be doing more detailed modeling here. One of the things that's come out recently is FEMA, one of our favorite organizations, has developed a new set of maps for Rhode Island. And the interesting thing is that there has been no change in the data. There has been no change in the extreme events that we've seen. Yet, on our south shore, they dropped the flood elevation estimates by 3 to 4 feet. Doesn't make any sense, and you can see these are the old and new maps. So these are the previous maps that were here, and then we have the new maps where there's actually been reductions. So this is the old map with the V zone here. V zone stands for velocity zone, which means that zone is capable of supporting a 3-foot wave. 3-foot wave will take a structure out. So these you have to design and be pile supported. These are A zones, and they are what they call still water levels. Obviously, they're not still at all, but you can build on surface level if you meet the elevation here. Look at the new maps. We went from V zone here to A zone here, and we had a drop of elevation 3 feet in this area here. And here's some of the wonderful stuff that FEMA generates. So we go from a V zone of 22 to an A zone of 14. That's physically impossible. But these are the maps that we're dealing with. So our intention is to take that, and I'll show you here in a second what we're going to do. The other thing is that FEMA treats these as certainty, or with certainty that these events are going to occur. And typically when we look at things, we tend to deal with it in probability fashion. So we would have an upper 95%, lower 95%, and then a mean that runs through that. And these are off the extreme events that NOAA has plotted. So you would think that FEMA would use one of these, and they didn't. They went here with no explanation as to why. It all turns out that they changed the method of analysis using what's called the L method, and that is a problem for us because it is not good for open ocean. So, as you can see, no change in the data, but we have a problem here in terms of the maps changing with really no explanation. But what it does is it tends to underestimate the threat at the shore while overestimating the threat in the upper bay. So what we're going to be doing is taking those models that I was just referring to and running very high resolution down to a 10-meter grid to produce an entire set of maps for the South Shore of Rhode Island, that being Washington County. And we're going to take other 2 or 3 high profile areas that we need to look at and start to run these. Eventually, we hope to develop a set for the entire state using this new methodology. The FEMA Region 1 is using a methodology from the 1970s, while every other region in the country is using methodology from 2005, 2009. So we've got methodology being used for, it's 40 years old here. So it's a time for us to plan. It's a time for us to deal with that. One of the things that I just wanted to point out, for instance, at the individual level, we just came out with a new brochure for homeowners, either that are potential buyers or homeowners now. And this starts to give them information that they need to start to prepare now for these events. And one of the things we're pushing and we're starting to develop is a program called Fortified. And that is working with the insurance industry where they've developed a very advanced code for housing structures. The nice thing about it is it was designed as a retrofit code. So you can take an existing structure, go back and retrofit that structure and harden it so it will take and withstand these events. And that's what we're trying to do and push in this area now. is this concept of hardening structures. Even though that probably 98% of our housing stock was built before good modern hurricane codes, that doesn't mean that we can't go back and retrofit these structures and harden it so that we can withstand these events. We do not want to see the dislocations that have occurred after Katrina, after Sandy, and other areas. We want to be able to withstand these events. Whether you know it or not, New Jersey, now, when Hurricane Sandy came in, it was barely a Category 1 hurricane in New Jersey. The reason it was so devastating is it was a combination of a both tropical and extratropical event that allowed that storm to propagate over several tide cycles. So when it hit, it went over several tide cycles. New Jersey lost 360,000 homes in that event. And it was not a wind event, it was a surge event. We have about 420,000 homes in our housing stock here in Rhode Island. So we don't want to lose that. We want to make sure it's there. So how does that relate to the open space? We need to be able to know what threats our shoreline's going to face. And open space is a very good resilient tool. If you look at the way the Dutch or the Netherlands have dealt with this issue, and if there is one nation that has taken this seriously and done it in a way that no other country has, it's the Netherlands. But what they do is they invite the water in and they use their open spaces for dealing with these events so that there's a combination of both a storm mitigation device and open space when they're not flooded. So these are some of the things that we're looking at trying to integrate in, and they're very important for a city like Newport to start to think about as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Grover. So everybody looked at that map and figured out where their house was, right? Okay. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. Our next speaker, James Lima, is the principal of James Lima Planning, which specializes in the economics of public space. James has extensive private and public sector experience in the planning and revitalization of urban centers at a variety of scales. He currently advises public and private sector clients on a range of development matters that include affordable housing, large-scale planning and development of former industrial waterfronts, downtown district growth strategies, cultural art facilities development, the economic value of investments in the public realm, and adaptive reuse of historic properties. The principal focus of all this work is on the economics of placemaking. James was most recently a partner at the real estate and economic advisory firm HR&A Advisors. Mr. Lima was New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg's appointee as founding president of the Governor's Island Preservation and Education Corporation, or GIPEC, a public corporation overseeing the planning, redevelopment, and operations of the 172-acre former military facility in New York Harbor. Mr. Lima served as a senior vice president for special projects at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, where he managed initiatives focused on growth of the city's central business districts and increasing public access to the city's waterfront, including leading the planning, consensus building, and public approvals for the downtown Brooklyn redevelopment plan. James led similar efforts on the administrative's behalf in downtown Flushing, Queens, Governor's Island, and Upper Manhattan. James has earned a BA from Columbia College with a major in architecture and urban studies and stayed on there at Columbia to complete the MS Red program, or RED program, at the Harvard Kennedy School. And he participated in a program for senior executives in state and local government as a Fannie Mae Fellow. Mr. Lima is currently an assistant adjunct professor at Columbia University in the Master of Science in Real Estate Development program and is the member of the board of directors of Syracuse University School of Architecture, the Northeastern University School of Architecture, the New York Harbor Foundation, and the Interdisciplinary Journal of Contemporary Architecture, Landscape, and Urbanism called Places. Please welcome a part-time Tivertonian, James Lima.
Thank you, Tanya. Hi. Wow, Grover. Come on, let's all maybe take a deep breath. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. It's great to be here. You guys are tough acts to follow. I really enjoyed all that. I'm gonna talk about cities and a tour around the United States with a focus on New York, where a lot of my work has happened. But it's not about the places so much and the scale of urbanity and density, but really about principles that I think are replicable and apply here. As Tanya said, my work has really been at the intersection of public and private sectors and of urban design and real estate development feasibility. So a lot of it is on the implementation side, and I think the good news following discussion about climate is there are a lot of lessons to learn, and there are a lot of opportunities as cities like Newport start to think about resiliency and coastal protection. But also as you continue to grow and continue to both strengthen the historic character of the place and the things that make you, unique and authentic and so desirable as an international destination for visitation, there are opportunities for new placemaking and opportunities to make this city even more livable, to have an even greater quality of life, and to be more economically competitive. Workers today, the labor pool, has never been more mobile. And so it's not really about where companies want to put their offices and bring workers. It's where workers want to live with their families and have a certain lifestyle, and the companies essentially follow that. So the opportunity for Newport, as you think about growth and preservation and land conservation paired with economic development, is what are the opportunities as we invest in new public infrastructure around resiliency, in new public infrastructure for greater streets, more beautiful parks and open spaces, repairing and replacing the old systems that we have. How are those opportunities for enhanced public realms, the organizers of civic activity, but also the organizers of significant potential future real estate development and economic generators that strengthen your tax base, that identify potential revenue streams to fund parks and open space maintenance and management? One of the things that government is reasonably good at is finding the capital dollars to build things like parks. You get a consensus vision for what the park should be, and eventually the money is cobbled together. What government is absolutely terrible at, consistently everywhere in the United States, is making sure that there's the recurring funding available for proper maintenance and management and operations of those public spaces, the parks, the open spaces, the streets. And so I want to talk a little bit about the opportunities to also embed into some of your open spaces and parks. And this usually, creates some level of anxiety with some people. It's like, what are the opportunities and lessons learned and best practices to embed enhancements to these parks, which actually also happen to be revenue generators? So my work has been largely urban, but I am a Newport County resident to the core, and I was a lucky kid who grew up at Fogland Beach, and I left at 17 to go to college, and somehow I fell in love with New York City, and I never left. But I have a home at Tiverton Four Corners, and one of the things that makes me most happy is to be working out in my vegetable garden in Tiverton, and spent a lot of time growing up in Newport. So it's part of who I am, is thinking about more vibrant urban places, but also a connectedness that those places can have with the natural environments. And those things should not be mutually inconsistent. I want to talk about a resiliency project that has just been awarded a $335 million grant from HUD. That's a lot of money. And it's a project that I'm working on with Danish and Dutch planners and designers to flood protect 10 miles of flood-prone Lower Manhattan. We see it as a bold, ambitious infrastructure project. a la Robert Moses. But it's been prepared to date with a really intensive community engagement process, very much not like Robert Moses, and very much like the ethos of Jane Jacobs. And that is really a critical element, I believe, in thinking in the future about placemaking and economic growth and quality of life for Newport. There needs to be a certain boldness of vision and a clarity of what the bigger picture is, and thinking about Newport's economy in a regional context, but also a real sensitivity to the need to meaningfully engage the community in a sustained way. And that doesn't mean, 6 months of charrettes. It means, what is a structural process for the continued ongoing voice for the community in a project? And so when I talk about sustainability and resiliency, it is physical resiliency, but it's also economic resiliency, so that there's an ability to maintain things to a level of quality over time. But it's also a resiliency in terms of community ownership and investment in the success and continuation of a particular initiative or a particular place. And that really takes time. And so we'll talk about processes where slow is fast, and slow and thorough collaboration is really a smart business strategy. So Lower Manhattan, as most of you know, was hit very hard by Sandy. It is not that unlike Newport in that it's a former port city that built its economy around wharfs. And in New York, those wharves eventually went away, and you can see how over time more and more of the Lower Manhattan shoreline was filled in. And those low-lying areas at the outer edge are where landfill was brought in. No surprise, those are areas where real estate values until relatively recently have been lowest, and where there's the greatest vulnerability of flooding. This is showing the FEMA flood zone for Lower Manhattan, and this is showing what happened. This is the night after Sandy. All of the power was knocked out for Lower Manhattan, millions and millions of people, with the exception of Battery Park City, which was built in the 1980s and had new standards of infrastructure. So our idea is to reconnect the city to a resilient infrastructure and to restore a durability to prevent this kind of situation happening again. Not only was power knocked out, there was massive flooding in Wall Street and neighborhoods from West 57th Street all the way down to the Battery. So it's really looking at resilient infrastructure in terms of how neighborhoods need to function, but also programming opportunities and how different communities can have different solutions. But the overarching idea, and I think this is really relevant for Newport, is the moment of creating a resiliency infrastructure at your water's edge is also a moment to think about overlaying a new civic or social infrastructure for a relatively insignificant additional cost. That new place, that new wall, that barrier, that berm, that levee, whatever that is, that should become your new most public and most wonderful place at the water's edge. So that is something that the Army Corps of Engineers has been absolutely terrible at doing. When the Army Corps of Engineers gets up in the morning, it's to build something. And they usually build barriers and things that divide communities and separate places. So our whole idea was to figure out a way to keep all this water out of this really important, historically significant, and economically enormous place of Lower Manhattan, but to do it in a way that still maintains a great public place. This is not supposed to happen at 6th Street and Avenue C, which is a very inland location in Lower Manhattan. The devastation from Sandy was awful. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but this is a water's edge location where right now there is literally a vertical wall that separates the FDR Drive, which is a north-south road that runs along the edge of the East River in Lower Manhattan, from East River Park, which is an underutilized park. And so what we've done is buried a heavy infrastructure system into a new, beautifully landscaped berm that creates new connections back to the inland. So this is an idea that has a lot of opportunity in many places. How do you create new public gathering places, enhanced systems, bikeways, natural connectors, green spaces, resilience, infrastructure as a series of connectors of the assets you already have. And then the opportunity to get out into the water. I'm going to talk a lot about that. So we are looking at that project and a lot of other waterfront planning work we're doing in terms of resilient community districts and thinking of it at a district scale. And that's about creating a performance standard for protecting, but it's also about allowing for economic growth. And as much as those two things, what are the opportunities to maximize public benefit when I'm engaged in those two other things? You cannot have an economic development agenda and a flood protection agenda that doesn't really focus on what are all the ways that those two things need to happen in the context of what the community really wants in terms of parks, jobs, housing choices, and other priorities that you may have. So thinking about that sweet spot in the middle that those three things intersect, that requires a process of dialogue with communities. Now the other value capture cycle is a critical one. And cities all over the world are looking at parks and open spaces as a central component of their economic development agenda. That sounds kind of improbable, right? How many people have been to the High Line Park in New York City? So the High Line Park, I worked on this 12 years ago when the Friends of the High Line, a fledgling not-for-profit group, came to the city of New York and said, we have this vision, everyone's really excited about it. The first phase of 3 will cost $110 million. If you, the city of New York, spend $110 million, here's a study that shows that there will be real estate value increases around it. There'll be tourist attractions that will generate revenue for the city, and you will more than pay for this investment in a 20-year payout. Well, that study was off by a factor of 2. In the 10 years since the first phase of the High Line was funded, more than $5 billion worth of new real estate investment has occurred along the High Line, which has become a destination as a park, but it's also defined a district and created a whole new neighborhood that associates itself with the High Line. So part of that was zoning that protected the park, that shifted bulk away from it, that allowed for growth as a city wants to continue to grow, but did it in a way that was very controlled and moved potential development to other sites, but also took a zoning structure that required air rights to be purchased to get that development right on other sites. And the purchase of those development rights went into a fund to pay for the High Line Park long term. The city also continues to make more commitments. Tomorrow is a very big day. The last and third section of the High Line will open to the public at the north end of the site. The city has continued to fund that park because it's so obviously an economic generator. Going back to the Big U, which is that 10-mile resiliency project in Lower Manhattan, this is a historic Battery Park where New York City began, the beginning of settlement in Lower Manhattan. It's a very historic place with historic forts. Castle Clinton is a national landmark. The National Park Service runs the monuments here and runs ferry operations out to Ellis Island and Liberty Island. So how do you integrate flood protection and enhance a park in a very historically significant place? So we've woven a berm system through a very significant grove of mature trees to try to skirt the landmarks and identified ways to flood-proof the buildings themselves. But it's sort of this complicated web of berming and then hard infrastructure that takes the form of a new reverse aquarium where you're inside the building looking at the fish on the outside of the building, and a new middle school for marine science and technology at the southern end. So it's a hard-edged building structure and then a berming system that ties back into a really diverse network of enclosures. Governor's Island, off limits for 200 years, the most storied place in the U.S. Army history. It is now a public park. I was tasked with trying to figure out what to do with it, and it is a remarkable landscape already. But again, these are opportunities where if you can't find capital funding early on, look to programming and innovation in programming. You know, a lot of our parks in the US were retreats from the harsh industrial life of cities in the industrial era, right? And that's taken a while to really shift. So we've gone from having our parks in our cities being retreats and places, you know, of passive use to much more recreational and actively programmed. And so one of the things that I am asked to do often is to think about both programming and the way that some of that programming can actually generate revenue that supports the park and other public benefits. One of this thing that's happening between Governor's Island that we just saw in the foreground and Lower Manhattan, which we see in the background, is repopulating New York Harbor with oyster beds. The historic ecological system of New York Harbor, it was so significantly populated with oysters that it was a navigational hazard. Oysters were everywhere. You know, what is the potential for Newport to think about its new and increased open space being in the water? How can that be part of the education opportunity? How can it be part of a coastal resiliency first line of defense to slow down wave attack? But also, how can it be part of an ecological restoration network and recreational system? I'm on the board of the New York Harbor School, which is on Governor's Island. President Clinton came for a first day of class 2 weeks ago and launched the Billion Oyster Initiative, which is funded with a $5 million grant from the National Science Foundation to repopulate New York Harbor with 1 billion oysters, and that will be enough oysters to filter the water of the inner harbor of New York, if you believe this. Every 3 days, the water will be fully filtered. So it's not to eat oysters, but it's to use them as effective filters, as new flood protectors, and as restoring ecosystems that will continue to have exponential benefits. So think about the ways that you have opportunities to get the kids who live in Newport and in Newport County, you know, to engage in the harbor, engage in, you know, Narragansett Bay. And I'm sure a lot of this is happening already, but how can you bring that right to the heart of the city? Again, the High Line was a spectacular project, very unique. I almost hate it in a way because everywhere I work now, people say, well, what's our High Line? You know, like, what do we have under our nose that we don't know about that you're going to, like, help us figure out that's going to make us, you know, instead of casinos, you're going to, like, create a park. But really, the other thing that it does is it connects assets. And I think that's a huge opportunity for Newporters. Like, how can you think about your system of parks and your great streets and your great waterfront places? How can some of them be made better, but how can they be connected to one another? And to really think about it as a network. And so for work that I did at the Urban Land Institute in Galveston after Hurricane Ike a few years ago, we really looked at an economy that's very much about tourism, very much about its relationship to the water, very much about its historic character and districts, and really thought about moves that we could make that essentially are about connecting the assets they already have to one another, and to think about placemaking in their core downtown that creates a stronger economy that will support new investments like the National Laboratory that is opened there, and really reinforces their waterfront entertainment and retail district. So this was a streetscape and placemaking plan that really just kind of fine-tuned the things that were already really great there, but linking their economic engines to one another, finding opportunities to create incubator spaces in prominent locations, you know, create a transparency of your next economy, of where your makers are making things, of where, you know, young people are interested in urban farming, about, you know, your great food culture. Like, put that right out there on Main Street and you know, work with private owners and downtown, you know, merchants to think about ways to kick your retail up a notch in terms of the, you know, basically the values of what you want your future to be. You know, it's about authenticity of place and all the things we love about our place, and that's food and its culture and its entertainment, but it's sort of the rich history of what is made here too. So it was really kind of linking assets, and then the same idea in Lexington, Kentucky, a lovely small city that is really about racehorses, bourbon, and basketball. And so we won a competition to create this new ribbon park, Town Branch Commons, which basically will unearth a stream that was the organizer of the original Lexington, Kentucky. It basically was like the sewer. And the city organized itself around that stream for that reason, and eventually it got decked over. And so this is both an archaeological excavation and a celebration of the limestone schist that is there. That is the reason that the bluegrass is so amazing for horses to eat and strengthen their bones and make them great racehorses, but also is amazing in the way that it makes the water delicious for bourbon. So it's a big part of who they are and why their economy is what it is, but it's also unique geologically. And so, you know, how can you celebrate the things that are sort of unique about your physical place and turn them into fantastic public spaces and public places? Again, this is not a dramatic change to the development of the city, but it was a dramatic change to the public realm. This is in design now. And so some of this is aspirational, and some of it here is really looking at a district of historic cultural arts, anchors, and this very faint ghosts of potential new buildings that could be built to get more people to live in this downtown, which is one of their big challenges. A lot of people live in the beautiful outlying bluegrass communities, but how do we get more people who want to live along this beautiful, interesting, diversely programmed park and get investment and developers interested in creating a really exciting, beautiful, high-quality urban experience. So we often look at funding sources principally with public sector partners, like, all right, what are the tools that you have? You can issue bonds. You can dedicate fees through referendum. You know, there are the classic ways that the public sector can find money. But then there's earned income, concessions that exist in parks. They're becoming increasingly sophisticated and clever and beautiful in the way that they are additive to the park experience. So it really encourages you to think about what are the ways that your parks, the ones that have the character that's more civic and more public as opposed to neighborhood character, you know, what are the ways that those can integrate more earned income opportunities, but also is there a management structure in place? Can a not-for-profit do more to program and get rental revenue for certain kinds of events? And then on the private side, creating districts, like in Lexington, is really thinking about creating a geography, and then within that geography, is there a self-taxing opportunity that says, we all agree as property owners and merchants that we're going to dedicate some small portion of the money we make back into the public realm and to the public benefit of our parks and our streets and management. In Minneapolis, finally, the most historic place in Minneapolis is the only natural waterfall on the whole Mississippi River. I had no idea there was a waterfall on the Mississippi River, but it's why Minneapolis is Minneapolis, because they took the hydropower and created sawmills, and then they created flour grist mills. And so the flour mills are still there today, Pillsbury and Gold Medal. And so the historic industrial heritage is here. It's been converted into very fancy loft apartments. But the place at the downtown is not worthy of the kind of development that has happened upland. It's a very ambitious city. Despite Rust Belt cities and like cold weather climate cities always blaming those things on why their economies don't work, Minneapolis has just like moved on and has made itself such a center of culture and of urban life and vitality that young people actually stay there and come there. And it's a huge hub for economic activity in the Midwest. And so the opportunity here is to create a great public place at this really important central location in the city. And so we're looking at creating something that really responds to the incredible topography, that responds to the density of development of the central business district just to the south, and to the cultural arts like the Guthrie Theater, adjacent to it, and to really think about how we can program for everybody, free activities, places to come and eat, to perch and to sit and to look at the water. I mean, Newport has no shortage of places to come sit and look at the water, but you'd be amazed at how many cities don't have an opportunity to come to a public place and look out on the water. Now, maybe you need more public places to do that in your downtown. But it's something to think about. Is like, do you have the kind of programming that really serve the needs of everybody in the city? And what are ways to integrate that into the life of what people are doing in the downtown? One of the challenges for Minneapolis was to embrace the fact that they have cold winters. Like, how do we make the site programmed in ways that you come and you rent snowshoes for free, or you do summer concerts? You do pop-up events, easy food trucks and nighttime events where young people come together, just creating vibrancy. You do tours that really explore the historic fabric of the ruins of a place like that. A beautifully designed visitor center. I noticed your Loeb Visitor Center. It's quite lovely. And then, what are the ways to get everybody behind when you do have an opportunity to create a new park or an enhanced park? First and foremost, a compelling vision and a clear plan. You need to scale the operations of anything that you're going to embed as a revenue generator in the park, both flexibly, because you don't know what's going to happen in a place seasonally. You want designs to be very flexible, to scale up or scale down. It has to enhance the park experience. I mean, it has to be additive to the civic enjoyment of the place, and respond to your needs. And make it local. We spent a huge amount of time in Minneapolis talking to the best restaurateurs, the high-quality caterers, the interesting young people who were doing CSAs, and just getting people excited about how they could be part of a new little pavilion or a little restaurant or place that would be on the waterfront. So again, that was as much about reaching out to them, creating community ownership, and letting them run with it. We kind of created the armature for it and got them excited and explained how the numbers could work and how the zoning works and how it could be cited, and went back and forth on design options. And we laid out a framework and then said, and here's how you could go ahead and implement it. And then you let a community that has lots of strong leadership and lots of creative people and lots of deep connections to that community implement. But you've given them the tools to do that. Now, every city I'm working in wants a Shake Shack. It's basically hamburgers, fries, and really good milkshakes. But the idea here was like a really nicely integrated concession that's fun. Everything about the way it's run, it's designed, it's managed, it's just fun. People, to this day, it's more than 10 years old in New York City, there's always a line. And now they're expanding everywhere, so who knows if you've got one yet or you're gonna have one soon. So finally, it's a network of park experiences that thread north-south along the river, and a relatively dainty pavilion that hopefully will have a little restaurant, cafe, place for families to stop in. And we tried to express this in terms of different kinds of users. So if a weekend tourist is already doing a series of things in this interesting downtown area, how does this little black pavilion in the larger park in the riverfront district fit into their life? How does a family with young children spend the day and stop for a quick snack? Or teenage lovers like hanging out by a fire pit and then they meet friends. The weekend senior citizen who lives across the street comes over and has a cup of tea and then meets someone for lunch. And then a commuter cyclist and how they move through the district. How do these places that we create, like where we make decisions about what it is, what it looks like, who it's for, how do we think about in the planning process and the design process, integrating all of these different ideas and these decisions into a public conversation, and to really make it relevant and interesting, authentic, and beloved first and foremost by the local community. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, James, and thank you to all the speakers. As you can see, open space is quite varied. There are a lot of ideas and a lot to think about when we're thinking about open space. So I'd like to thank all our speakers for coming this evening and give them a big round of applause again. They did a tremendous job. Thanks. Thanks, Ron.